Here in Wisconsin and across the country, over the past year, Trump's tariffs have caused major uncertainty with farmers. The Supreme Court decision that struck down those tariffs hasn't done a lot yet to eliminate those concerns and that uncertainty. Meanwhile, farm bankruptcies here in Wisconsin increased 700% in 2025. 16 farms filed for bankruptcy in 2025 versus 2 in 2024. Joining us to talk about the state of family farms in Wisconsin is Brian Reisinger. You may know him as the author of Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope, and the Untold Story of the Disappearing American Farmer. Brian, it's good to talk to you again. I spoke to you when the book first came out, and Jamie has spoken to you since. It's good to be back, but we know your story. For the people who might, can you give us a brief history of your family farm and its connection to Wisconsin?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me here. We've been around for 4 generations. My dad is still farming. My sister's working to take the farm over. And we really began in 1912 when my great-grandparents escaped pre-World War I Europe, came to Wisconsin to dig a better living out of the dirt, like so many people all across the state. And since then, our generation, or excuse me, our family has lived through the generations, through the Depression, through the farm crisis, through globalization, everything. And along the way, for any farm family, there's weather that blesses and threatens, there's economic upheaval, there's farm accidents. So we decided to tell that story honestly in our book, but weave that with the forces that are wiping out family farms across the country. And so that's what brings us here today, is this is a crisis that everybody in the state of Wisconsin and rural communities is living. And we decided it was time to tell the story.
Yeah.
Now, and it's a great book. I do implore anybody who wants a little history and to find out about what the farming community is like to take a read. You can find that at brian-reisinger.com. Now, Brian, you mentioned that we've seen a 700% increase in farm bankruptcies in Wisconsin in just the last year alone. For somebody who is a rural policy expert and who lives on a farm part-time and works within the farming community, what are you hearing from farmers across the state right now? Is this as serious as these facts make it sound right now?
Well, it is really challenging. It's very serious. And I think that the farm families that are out there, whatever their view is of one piece of news or one direction in politics or another, it's a continuation of something that people have been living for decades. And I think that's the thing I always try to tell people whenever we hear like the national media swooping in saying, hey, farmers are in crisis. Farmers are kind of like, hey, we've been in crisis here. What are we going to do about this in a big picture way? So it's true that some of the recent events have been challenging. And it's also true that those recent events are attached to deep, deep issues. We've had economic crises from the Great Depression to COVID and beyond that our country didn't understand the impact of. We've had governmental policies from both parties for decades. We've had technology that's moved American agriculture forward, but also leaves so many of our family farms behind. These are some of those foundational things that are going on, driving economic decline, whatever's happening in the news. And then when you see something dramatic that's happening to farmers, that adds on top of it. So that's really the reality that our farm families are living.
Brian, for people who are not in the agriculture industry, we don't, we know what farms are, we know what farmers do, but we hear different things regarding the tariffs and other policies. Some farmers are saying, no, these are horrible things. They're really hurting us. We're paying more for fertilizer. We're paying more for this and that. But then there are other farmers who are saying, yeah, things are rough, but it's leveling the playing field as far as trade. Is there a truth on one side or the other? Or is it in the middle? What is the actual impact for Wisconsin farmers?
I'm so glad you asked that, because there's so many people making, political arguments one direction or another. And here's the reality, and this is why you hear things from farmers like that. Farmers live in a state of double-edged sword as it pertains to trade. So it is true that when you have trade disputes that spin out of control, retaliatory tariffs from other countries, meaning they're not going to buy our goods, they're going to make it more expensive to sell soybeans in China, for instance, and nobody in China is going to be buying soybeans in America. That's really challenging. We saw that last fall. At the same time, the other swing of that double-edged blade is the fact that farm families have been living with unfair trade practices since the 90s. And this is something that both parties have talked about. There were a lot of labor Democrats who talked about this back in the day, too. And the reality is that you have great big trading partners like China that will buy up, whether it's dairy or whether it's corn or soybeans, they'll buy it up until they have American farmers hostage, and then they'll dump those products to drive the prices down. So we've got unfair trade keeping prices down. We've also got trade disputes if they spin out of control causing problems. So what you have, not all farmers agree, and I don't speak for all of them, but we have is a lot of farmers saying, boy, we do need to get tough. We do need to do something to make sure that trade across the globe is fair to our farmers. At the same time, they say, hey, we got to make sure that these negotiations reach a result and that we don't end up just having disputes that make people not willing to deal with it and shut markets down. So it's those two things at once. That's what happens in the real world.
So we're first of all, we're talking with Brian Reisinger. He's the author of Land Rich, Cash Poor. He is a writer. He's a rural policy expert. If you want to check out the book or more on him, go to brian-reisinger.com. So when you talk a little bit about all of these trade disputes, and you and I have had this conversation, I feel like there are certain subsects of the world that are used as pawns for each political party, and I feel like farmers are very much in part of that game. How do we get through to our legislators? What can we be telling them? What can the farming community or anybody who just is worried about the family farm, because they are such a backbone of our community, what can we be imploring to our legislators right now?
I always tell people, if you want to see a politician's arm shoot up fast, ask them if they've ever voted to support a farmer, because everybody's got some kind of program or something one way or the other in both parties they voted for, of course, to support the farmer. They're going to say that. The reality is that we need to go a layer deeper. And what I always say to people, and this was born out of research in the book, when I was seeing all the dilemmas where we had false choices, made the wrong choice in our history, and I got the chance to tie that with my family story and what so many farm families have lived through. What I always say is, hey, ask your leaders what they're doing to create new entrepreneurial opportunity for our farmers, because that's harder. They have to stop and think about that. And if they don't know, well, what could I do to create new opportunity for our farmers? Talk to them about how you want to buy your food. Talk to them about what you want out of your food, where you want to get, local or regional or specialty foods. Like, talk to them about how you want things to be different and how you could connect that with farmers down the road if only our food system was different. That challenges them to do something to change the situation, find ways for food to get from the farm gate to the dinner table more ways. Because right now, with us wiping out farms at 45,000 a year on average for the past century, we're making it harder and harder for farmers to grow food and harder for that food to get from the farm gate to the dinner table. It's jacking up food prices. It's making things less healthy. It's making it harder to find local food sources, all these problems.
See, you say those numbers, and you're used to hearing those numbers, but people outside of the industry, those numbers are shocking. And I'm sure there are other things on a day-to-day basis for a family farm like yours. From how much is ice having an effect on costs, and what are the other kind of things that day to day you're dealing with? Because it's everybody can understand, oh, fertilizer costs more, seed costs more. Okay, that's the same as if we go to the grocery store, things cost more. But there's a lot of other factors at play on the day to day. And what are some of those for the people who, we care, but we just don't know?
Yeah, absolutely. When my dad goes into the fields planting this spring, and when my sister who's working to take over the farm joins him, when they're doing that, and when all of us are working to figure out where we're going to go with our farm in the future, what we're dealing with is the fact that there are very few new and growing markets for farmers out there. Most farmers are, facing the fact that they've got markets available to them that for one reason or another have kind of become broken. You got corn, field corn. The price of corn in the past year was about $4. That's not too far off from where it was when I was born in 1984, when I was a kid. Meantime, the seed, the feed, the fertilizer, the energy, all those costs continue to go up. Now, you mentioned ice and other things. When you talk about things like, farm labor, half our farm labor comes from immigrant labor. What we need is Washington not only to find a way to change our food system, find a way to, secure the border, which has been a bipartisan goal for a long time and many farmers support, while also increasing access to legal farm labor. I mean, the H-2A farm visa program is there for people who want to come to this country and work hard and find a way up. And we do need that agricultural labor. Our farm has never had immigrant labor, but there are farms that aren't too much bigger than ours down the road who have. And so the reality is you got all these increasing costs and all these huge disruptions going on where farmers are kind of caught in the crosshairs of all of our political crosswinds here. And while that's going on, they don't have new and growing markets. What we need is more and more places that farmers could say, hey, I could sell this over here. I could sell that over there. There's very little of that available to our farmers these days.
Brian, we also hear right now that there are some of these farmers who are having harder times getting the operating loans that they might depend on each and every season. So why are lenders starting to view farming and the farms in general as a bigger risk?
Yeah, well, one of the issues that we've got is that farming has continued to go toward this tipping point. We're just getting tougher and tougher to point to farming and say, "Hey, this is something that I can invest in." Now, I think that's actually a misnomer. I think people are mistaken about that. The reality is that people care more than ever about where their food comes from, and there are a lot of hardworking, resilient farm families making it through all of this. Even though our country does so many things to make the economics not work, but one of the big things that we can do, a lever we can pull in order to make getting operating loans easier, is to pass a bipartisan farm bill. And they're actually debating that this week. The farm bill is supposed to be passed for 5 years ahead. So you pass the farm bill and it sets things for 5 years. And whether people like the government programs or not, there's debates about that. Those programs set all kinds of pricing mechanisms and different things in the industry. So you can want more government or less government, whatever you want. Passing that bipartisan farm bill is crucial to setting up all these programs and letting people know what the industry is going to be like. So bankers who are out there, they need to see a farm bill in order to be able to lend. So not having one makes it harder even for private sector sources of capital, bankers and credit unions and others, to lend to a farmer.
You mentioned the number of family farms that go under every year, and we've talked about the financing and all of that. How are the big corporate farms being affected? That would seem like they're safer, and people like you guys and your smaller farm are really the ones who are in danger. There's always going to be somebody growing the food because we need to eat it. But
Yeah.
are the family farms in exponentially more danger?
Yeah. What's happening overall is that all farms, large, small, whatever shape and size, are all subject to this overall force of get big or get out. All these problems we've been talking about, the one thing all these problems have in common is they all push farms toward get big or get out. So the great big farms are getting bigger and bigger because they have to be able to make it economically, and they gobble up other farms. The medium and small size farms are either getting bigger as well or slipping by the wayside. There are some who are being creative, diversifying, finding ways to make it, but it is very, very hard. So that's what's going on in family farms. You're right. As a result, those mid-sized and small farms are getting in worse and worse shape. Here's the reality. We will always have someone growing our food, but if we keep losing farms at this rate, 45,000 a year going forward, like we have for the past century, 45,000 a year, I'm 41. By the time my little baby grows, my age will have lost the rest of our family farms in this country. So we'll have a food system that is too big to fail. If you think about that, imagine what happened when the banks are too big to fail. People worried, is the ATM going to kick out money to me? Then they're going to have to wonder, is the store or the restaurant going to have food for me? If we have such big systems and part of it collapses, that's a huge problem.
And Brian, we have about a minute left. If we continue losing these farms, the mid-sized farms at the rate that we're talking, what does this mean for rural communities across states like Wisconsin? And what is the future of agriculture in general?
Yeah, well, all Americans in that scenario are going to see food prices continue to get higher and food less healthy. For farm families in rural communities, here's what happens. Farming is the backbone of a lot of rural communities, even places that have transitioned toward other things. They still have roots so deep in agriculture that when you keep losing your farms, you harm your rural communities. There's fewer businesses in downtown Main Street. There's fewer banks. There's fewer everything. And so it really does hollow out our rural communities. Now, I have optimism because 96% of our farms are still family farms. That means there's nearly 2 million farm families out there still fighting to make it. And we try to tell those resilient stories too.
Well, Brian, we always enjoy talking to you. Brian Reisinger is our guest. He is the author of Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope, and the Untold History of the Disappearing American Farmer. You can get it anywhere books are sold or go to brian-reisinger.com. Brian, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for shedding light on these issues.
Yeah.